Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Rotoworld Football Show. I am Patrick Daugherty with Denny Carter. We are both finally back from the beach where we were for approximately 9 weeks apiece. But we are here today to preview the AFC North with the help of BaltimoreRavens.com's Clifton Brown and our old friend from Sharp Football Analysis, Rich Hribar. Clifton is going to join us right off the jump here, while Rich will be in around 20 minutes or so. But Denny, let's just get right into it. Because Baltimore Ravens, this is someone we really needed an expert. There's a lot going on, a lot of moving parts of this team. But first, Clifton, just how are you doing? Assuming your summer is already over, training camp is beginning next week. Is any thoughts of any idle time just gone now for the next 5-6 months?
Yes, it is. I got away for a little bit a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, like you said, training camp, can't believe it's almost already here. And it's already a 12-month-a-year business, but yeah, we're getting ready to go now. So I'm actually excited. I think it's going to be a good year for the Ravens. We'll see what happens.
I'm glad you're excited because, I mean, all three of us, we're football industry lifers at this point. We love football, but I always have a pang of regret when training camp starts. I go, summer's over. It's really here.
I wish I had enjoyed that time a little more.
Yeah, I know. Because like Clifton said, it's a 12-month-a-year job now. And Clifton, we'll just get right into it. We are a fantasy football website. We care about pass attempts because pass attempts equals fantasy points. That's just where the fantasy points are these days. The Ravens, under former offensive coordinator Greg Roman and Lamar Jackson, been one of the run-heaviest teams, not just in the NFL, but really of the 21st century. Todd Monken is the new offensive sheriff in town, I guess. We know all about, he has a pass-happy reputation, not maybe pass-happy, but pass-friendly reputation. Is this like passing game increase going to be for real? Or is there only so much a team with Lamar Jackson is going to throw? He's a unique player with a unique skill set. How do you think this Ravens offense is going to look under new offensive coordinator Todd Monken?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think anyone really knows for sure, but I do believe, yes, they'll definitely be more of a passing offense for sure. How much more is the question. And will they have any one or two receivers who, are going to be 1,000-yard guys, or will the wealth be spread around to the point where, the passing game may improve, but no one guy or two guys really become, a 1A receiver? We'll have to see. But yeah, I mean, I think they definitely, they signed Odell Beckham for a reason, drafted Zay Flowers for a reason, really have hopes that Rashod Bateman can stay healthy for a full season for the first time. And Lamar is going to get a chance to do what I think he's always wanted to do, play in an offense where he can show that he can move the ball up and down the field through the air on a consistent basis. And he's finally got, a lot of weapons now to do it with. So we'll see. But yes, if you like the passing game, I think you will like watching the Ravens more this year.
Denny's got a question, but you made a really interesting point there where it's not just fantasy managers that have wanted more pass attempts from the Ravens. It has seemed like Lamar Jackson is amongst the legion of people who have been wanting to pass more, and for several years at that.
Yeah, I mean, he made a statement, I believe it was in minicamp, where, the passing game can only take you so, the running game can only take you so far. And, that's about as strong a statement as we've heard from Lamar about, hey, I feel like, I have a job to move the ball through the air. The Ravens are going to run it too. I mean, J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards are a really good 1-2 punch. All offensive coordinators talk about being balanced. I do believe that Todd Monken wants that. He wants to be a team that can hurt you either way. That's the way the Georgia Bulldogs were the last couple of years. They could run it. They could throw it. He wants the Ravens to be the same way. But, yes, in today's NFL, there are just times where you have to move the ball through the air to be effective. I do believe the Ravens, that has hurt them in the past, particularly when they got down in games, that, would they be able to come back through the air? Now I think week in and week out, you're going to see them put the ball up a little bit more. And they hope to have more explosive plays, which is really what you want. It's hard to NFL.
And what Lamar is capable of, too.
He is. And then we haven't even talked about Lamar running. I don't think he's going to run as much as he used to, but obviously he's still a quarterback that can create things through his legs. He can buy time. He can hurt you with a run, on third down if nobody's open to get the first. So, yeah, I mean, in the Ravens' vision, they'll be a team that can hurt you in so many ways that you can't figure out how to stop them from week to week. We'll see if that happens, but it will be interesting to watch.
These aren't your grandfather's Ravens, is what you're saying. I mean, this is possibly a new look offense. In this new look offense, in this Todd Monken offense, do you see Mark Andrews, I guess, dominating targets the way he has in previous versions of this Ravens offense? I know you just mentioned all the pass catchers that this team has added over the past 6 months or so. Do you see Andrews still being like that clear-cut number one target for Lamar?
I do believe that there's a chance that Mark Andrews could still lead them in targets and receiving. I think he's going to see a little less double coverage this year, which is going to be good for him. He's one of the best tight ends in football. That's been established, and he's maybe Lamar's favorite target, particularly, in third down situations. So, Mark Andrews is a guy, if you're talking about fantasy football and tight ends, I think he'd be near the top of your list as far as guys that take. I don't think that will change. And the Ravens, they've got a couple other young tight ends too, Isaiah Likely and Charlie Kohler, who may be part of the mix, but Andrews is the main guy. Lamar loves throwing to him. Mm-hmm. I do believe Andrews is going to have another big year statistically.
You mentioned a minute ago, Clifton, about Lamar's, rushing involvement, or I guess involvement in the run game for the Ravens, how that might be taken back a little bit going into this year. I guess my question is, do his recent injuries over the past 2 years factor into that calculus of having him rush a little less? I should say that last year's injury came in the pocket, so it's not like he was rushing and got hurt that way. But do you think those injuries have the Ravens spooked a little bit about him running?
Well, there's no question that Lamar's health is a key to the season. And they love to keep him out of harm's way as much as possible. But to say that he's going to run less than he has in the past, I think would be true. To say he's still not going to run more than most quarterbacks, I would expect him still to run more than all but a few because he's just so gifted at doing it. And certainly when you get in game-winning situations, scoring situations, you don't want to take that away from the Ravens offense. So, I don't think Lamar is going to break his own record, for rushing yards as for a quarterback. That yard, someone else may have to break that. He may have already had his top rushing season of his career. But he's still going to be a guy that, he's going to make more running yards than any quarterback or all but a few quarterbacks. I still believe that's going to be the case.
Clifton, you referenced kind of what is now a log jam in the Ravens receiver core, and it's quite a difference from last season where by the end of the year, the Ravens were rotating in receivers that just like casual football fans had not heard of, maybe even some diehard Ravens fans had not heard of. It was a really dire depth situation at receiver, especially with Rashod Bateman injured. But like you said, now they have a $15 million free agent, Odell Beckham. They have a former first-round pick in Rashod Bateman, who's still only in his third year. They have a new first-round pick in Zay Flowers. Just, is there going to be a clear number one in this group? Or is this kind of they're going to have to figure it out as they go? Everyone's going to just kind of play all over the field. Just how do you think it's going to shake out between those three really big names at wide receiver?
Yeah, I mean, if assuming all of them are healthy, Odell Beckham has proven that he's a number one guy in this league. The last time we saw him play football, he was probably on his way to winning the MVP in the Super Bowl for the Rams. So he's still only 30 years old. I definitely don't buy any narrative that he's, too old to be a star receiver. I think more the question would be health. So you have him, Rashod Bateman, the guy that, when he's been healthy, he's been productive, but he hasn't been able to stay healthy. So I look at Bateman, Beckham being the top two guys going in. But at least now with the addition of also Nelson Aguilar, we haven't mentioned him. They've still got Devin Duvernay, Zay Flowers. That's 5 targets right for wide receiver before we even get to the tight ends. There is only one ball. That's a lot of mouths to feed. So again, I don't think the Ravens are going to have more than, if I had to guess, more than one wide receiver, if any, get 1,000 yards. If they do have one, my best guess would be it would be Beckham would be the guy if he stays healthy. But again, Andrews could end up with more yards than all the wide receivers. And I do believe that they'll have an offense where 4 or 5 guys are sharing touches rather than having, a big gun who's really soaking up all the targets.
You mentioned Rashod Bateman's health, which has just been a huge source of frustration, I'm sure, for the Ravens and fantasy managers. Just a really talented guy we want to see out in the field. How did he look this spring? Is he healthy heading into training camp? Is he going to be full go for week 1? I mean, we know there's no doubt about his week 1 availability. Just what do you think his health and conditioning level is right now?
This is Bateman you're speaking of?
Yes, Bateman.
Yeah, he had a cortisone injection right before mandatory minicamp, so he did not participate in mandatory minicamp. He watched from the sidelines. The hope is that he'll be healthy starting training camp, and the definite hope that he'll be healthy for week 1. Bateman never had injury problems in college, but in his 2 years in NFL, he has. So that's the key with him. If he can stay on the field and have a full season, I don't think there's any doubt he'll be productive, but he hasn't been able to do that in Baltimore yet. So we'll see. But as far as his health right now, it's trending upward. They feel that in training camp, he'll be able to go. Even if early in training camp, I wouldn't be surprised if they're cautious with him. And I don't think you're going to see a lot of Beckham or Bateman in the preseason, if any. But the key is week 1, and they expect him to be, ramped up and ready to go. And if they have Beckham, Bateman, and Andrews on the field, let alone who else, that'll be more weaponry than Lamar's ever had. And it'll cause more problems for defenses as far as trying to match up and stop them.
Clifton, Zay Flowers enters the league is not super small by modern receiver standards. It's been a position that's getting smaller, but he's a smaller guy coming from a BC offense that just really wasn't very good during his 4 years there. He didn't have great quarterback play. He wasn't in great offenses. They got pretty creative with his usage, though, got really good at getting the ball in his hands, especially as a senior last year. Do you have any inkling yet on maybe how the Ravens might deploy Zay Flowers? Is he maybe kind of some gadgetry early in his career, or are they just going to unleash him as a first-round wide receiver?
Well, I definitely feel he's more than a gadget receiver, a lot more. I mean, you're right. The BC offense wasn't very good. They didn't have very good quarterback play, but look at the numbers he put up there at BC when everyone knew he was the guy you had to stop. Very few teams did. That's very impressive to me. I mean, he's a guy who his change of direction once he gets the football in his hands, he's a very hard guy to tackle, and he's looking to make more yards. So I think the Ravens will use him a lot, try to get the ball in his hands quickly, in space, let him make plays. He definitely can hurt teams, I believe, at this level from the slot. The big question is, can he hurt them as an outside receiver? And I do believe that playing with Bateman and Beckham will take some pressure off of Zay in that area. He definitely has the speed to hurt you deep. I think he's a kind of a similar player to Marquise Brown, a guy the Ravens used to have before they traded him in Arizona, that even though he's not the biggest guy, he can make contested catches. He can definitely hurt you over the top, and he can make yards after catch. So I think Flowers is going to be a very good NFL receiver. I just think he has too much talent that despite not being the biggest size, that he won't be effective.
Clifton, shifting to the Baltimore backfield, J.K. Dobbins over the final month of the regular season last year was one of the most productive, efficient running backs in the league. Just really blew up, seemed to be fully back from that knee injury he suffered in 2021. Where do you see him falling in this new offense? And are we going to see J.K. Dobbins take on, more of a lead back role, or are we looking more at a split backfield like we're used to seeing between him and Gus Edwards, or him and whoever else might emerge here?
Yeah, that's another interesting question, Denny. I mean, no one really knows for sure, but my guess would be that J.K., this is going to be his heaviest workload that he's had in his career. You mentioned that he did look really good the end of last season. He had another procedure during the middle of last year to clean up some scar tissue. And when he came back from that, he was definitely quicker, faster, and looked like he was more explosive. Now, 6 or 7 months removed from that, I expect him to really look good. Gus Edwards is a heck of a back, a completely different style, much more powerful between the tackles. But I do believe there's a chance that J.K. could get the bulk of the carries this year more than he has. Plus, I think Todd Monken really wants to get the running backs involved in the passing game a little bit more. And I think J.K. is going to be involved with that. He has good hands. You started seeing more of that at the end of last year. And I do believe that he's another guy, much like Zay Flowers. They just feel, hey, get the ball in his hands quickly in space. He can make guys miss and make plays. So J.K. and Gus are both in their contract years. It's a huge year for both of them. They're highly motivated. But speaking of J.K. specifically, I think he's going to have a really good year.
Yeah, just real quick on Dobbins, he missed mandatory mini camp for contract-related purposes. Do you see this as a long-term issue for Dobbins?
Well, we know running backs, they're kind of having trouble getting paid. It seems like
they got to
all
get
over
paid
the
when they can.
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, J.K. knows that the best way for him, and really for any player in this position, to get what you want is to have a huge year. And it's really tough on him that, he had a good rookie year, and just when it looked like he was really going to blossom, he got hurt. And really, it took 1 year and really a year and a half off his career. So he doesn't have a 3-year body of work to show because of injury. But yeah, I think that he's highly motivated. I don't think he's disgruntled, so to speak. I think he's highly motivated to show that he's a top back. And so he's hoping that this year he gets that opportunity. We'll see how it unfolds.
You mentioned more running back targets, by the way. That's been a constant sticking point in fantasy circles. The Ravens don't target the running backs in the passing game. We love receptions, even for running backs. Would you say J.K. Dobbins is in the lead for third down duties right now? We know that's not really Gus Edwards' game. Justice Hill is still on the roster. Would you call J.K. Dobbins, at least on paper, the Ravens' primary third down back?
Yeah, I would say so. Now, coaches always talk about pass protection too at running back. So, I think that's going to be interesting to see too. On third down, which running back does the coaching staff want in the games to try and protect Lamar, in addition to being a target for Lamar? Do you want it to be, well, every time JK's in the game on third down, that it's going to be, probably a pass? I mean, there's different things you have to think about when you're putting together a game plan as far as how you use the running backs in the passing game. But overall, like I said before, I do believe that JK will see more targets this year than he's seen in the past, because I just feel that he's a guy who they really want the ball in his hands in space. And that's a big Monken philosophy, that you just get the ball to playmakers in space and let them do the work. I mean, you just want them to be able to make plays, make you look good, kind of like playing basketball. Get the ball to the hot hand. And the Ravens feel they have more guys potentially who can get the hot hand this year than they've had in the past.
Clifton, we've taken up just about all your time, but before we get you out of here, I just wanted to ask, who was the most impressive skill player you saw in spring practice? And I know it's the spring practice. They're not in pads. A lot of guys aren't there. Who was the most impressive Ravens skill player you saw this spring?
Well, Mark Andrews looks impressive every practice.
That makes sense.
I'm going to eliminate him. The guy to me who was most impressive was Nelson Aguilar. I thought he had a really strong spring and mandatory minicamp. And, where does he fit in the pecking order of wide receivers? For good reason, people are focusing on Beckham, Bateman, and Zay Flowers. But particularly if one of those guys isn't healthy, I think Aguilar could be a surprise. His career has not been what people expected from a first-round pick. He's bounced around a little bit, but he has looked really good. I think that, this offense could be, something that really fits him well. And he and Lamar already looks like good chemistry, particularly on some back shoulder throws. So Aguilar would be a guy to watch, and then the backup tight end Isaiah Likely. I think he's another guy to watch too. He had some moments as a rookie, but he's been around all offseason. He looks like he's in great shape. He's another guy I think who can make a jump in his second year.
Really glad you mentioned him because the fantasy community would have been really upset if we did not mention Isaiah Likely. Denny and I somehow forgot. So really glad you got him in there. Interesting stuff on Nelson Aguilar too, who certainly seems like someone who profiles as someone who can make big plays down the field with Lamar Jackson. So that's another interesting name for you to get in there at the very end. Clifton, thank you so much for joining us. Clifton Brown from BaltimoreRavens.com, on Twitter at Clifton G. Brown. Thanks for taking some of the final quiet time you're going to have for the rest of this calendar year.
Appreciate it.
It's going to get crazy. So
no problem, guys. I enjoyed it. You guys take care. Have a great season.
You too. Thank you so much, Clifton. Clifton Brown from BaltimoreRavens.com. Yeah, again, Clifton G. Brown on Twitter. Really good stuff. Denny, I mean, I'm sure you were disappointed when he said Nelson Aguilar was but Nelson Aguilar, he would have been like the Ravens' maybe number one receiver down the stretch last year.
Oh,
so
for sure. Like by far, yeah.
It is crazy the way he's flying under the radar. And I can't believe we forgot to mention Isaiah Likely. That seems like
Likely is a niche fantasy interest, I think, right now, who I don't really know how Likely forces his way onto the field. Unless he's just so good that they actually like put him in the slot along with Andrews on the field. Like he's not going to be taking any snaps or routes away from Mark Andrews. So.
No, he's not. But really, really interesting stuff. Ravens a far more interesting team in fantasy this year than they have been the past few years.
Yes,
a lot of big names. Speaking of big names, we got a big one coming in after this quick break. We got the biggest. Some are saying he's a lord. Lord, he's our feudal lord. Reeves, but we will be right back after this. With the NFL season quickly approaching, now is the perfect time to get your Rotoworld Fantasy Football Draft Guide. Get ready for your draft and stay one step ahead of your league during the preseason with updated player rankings, profiles, projections, mock drafts, and more. Go to NBCSports.com/draft guide and use promo code DRAFT2023 to save 20% off at checkout. That is promo code DRAFT2023 to save 20% at NBCSports.com/draft guide. Denny, we got to get those rankings updated for DeAndre Hopkins.
I should.
He signed Sunday afternoon and take people behind the curtains Monday afternoon. We actually haven't done. DJ's asking me why we haven't done it yet. The answer is we were at the beach for 6 weeks.
Yeah, I talk a lot about adjusting the ranks, yet I don't adjust my own ranks. It is a curious thing.
Quite curious, that you do not adjust. But I'm sure Rich Hribar has already adjusted. I know I've been with Rich before where like something went down and he had his stuff updated within 30 or 45 minutes. So there's no way Rich has not already updated the ranks for the DeAndre Hopkins signing. It's our pleasure to welcome in the Lord himself, Mr. At Lord Reeves from Sharp Football Analysis. Richard, are you ready to talk some of the AFC North? We all know you're a huge Browns fan, right?
Yeah, listen, you guys have had a lot of professionals on to come talk about the teams they covered, and you brought me in to talk about that.
And now we have you.
I have to ask Denny, is adjusting the ranks conceding to being owned?
Well, look, my charge is that I have not been owned online, and in real life it actually happens all the time. My son owned me on vacation. I was wearing a lemon shirt, the actual collared shirt like this with lemons on it, and he said, "Dad, you are lemon zesty." And I said that I've been owned. So it happens in real life, just not online, Rich.
Never. Denny has never once been owned online. Rich, I mean, you used to be a 49ers fan. I don't know if you're still dabbling in that. We all know your son is a New York Football Giants fan, even though you live in Northern Ohio. What are his expectations for this upcoming season?
Yeah, he's actually pretty tame. He's kind of reached that kind of realistic football.
Oh, no. Is he at the realism age? That's no fun.
Yeah, he is. And I think when your team signs Daniel Jones to a contract extension that happens to you, it's very sobering very quickly. But
there's a wake-up call.
He's very cognizant of how the New York Giants won football games last year, and he's excited about Brian Daboll and what the job Brian Daboll did. I think that the best way to sum it up and how he feels is how I feel is that the Giants are probably going to be a better football team than they were last year and have worse results.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's very, very rich way to start the show, by the way.
Yes, it is.
That's as rich of a line. So I don't know why I'm asking about the Giants. We're here talk about the AFC North, and we're talking about your hometown team, the Cleveland Browns. That's not who you're a fan of because, you didn't like Bernie Kosar? He wasn't good enough for you?
I've told this story before, but I grew up in a household that really didn't have my dad was not a football fan. So, I didn't have football pushed on me or like, you have to cheer for this team. We root for this team every Sunday. So I never had that like imposed on me. And, that's
a parenting failure. No offense to your dad.
Yeah, but you're similar age as me. We only got 2 channels as a kid, and the Browns would be on at 1 p.m. Watching AFC Central football at that point, and you're watching 2 teams just beat the hell out of each other. They've got Kevin Mack and Ernest Biner. They're running the football down the field. The games are 13-10, and then at 4 p.m. Madden and Summerall would come on. And you're watching the 49ers play, and it was like watching a different sport. I was like, look at this dude, Jerry Rice, Joe Montana, Roger Craig. Like, what sport are these guys? I just watched these guys roll around in the mud for 3.5 hours. Like, this is ballet. Like, it was really easy to like the 49ers then, guys. You call me a front or not, but it was like losing your virginity to Rachel McAdams. Like, it was, what are you going to do, man? Like, it is what it is. It was just glorious.
We're gonna have to edit that out, I think.
Quite a picture you've painted there.
My kids are listening, for the love of it.
Rich, the Browns, they don't want to play that kind of football anymore, but they still played that kind of football last year, even with Deshaun Watson. After he came back, they remained a run-heavy team. I mean, I don't even. This is way too general of a question. I feel like do we feel like the switch is actually going to flip? Are they going to become a more pass-heavy, Deshaun Watson-oriented offense? I was surprised that they didn't make the switch immediately last year, but it was only 5 games left in the season or whatever it was. Maybe it was 7. I can't remember. 5 or 7 games left in the season. Hard to make huge offensive adjustments, but didn't like the offense they were deploying with Deshaun Watson. Is the expectation we're going to get a more high-flying Cleveland Browns offense this year?
Yeah, I think they've made gradual steps. If you look at under Kevin Stefanski, I mean, their rate of usage of 11 personnel on passing plays went up to 71% last year. It was 53.4% the year prior under Kevin Stefanski and 45.4% the year before that. So, like, it's getting there. And when Deshaun Watson was under center, it was 76.8%. And you look at the personnel the Browns had last year where they still were doing that, and they didn't have a wide receiver 3, really even a great wide receiver 2 either. And they were still kind of, transitioning to kind of modern football, playing a lot more 11 personnel. I mean, David Bell was out there just getting exercise, man. The old-fashioned excuse, just out there running around.
Chris Hogan cardio.
Yeah, and you look at the changes they've made wholesale. I think they're already preparing for Donovan Peoples-Jones in his contract here. So you draft a guy like Cedric Tillman. They add Marquise Brown. You trade for Elijah Moore. And don't forget, they're also going to be getting Jakeem Grant back too this year. And obviously he's going to play more of a larger role on special teams, but he is a guy that's just adding more speed to the offense. So they're going to be a lot faster and have a lot more viable receivers because David Bell ran 300 pass routes last year and got no production out of him. They're just going to be putting a lot more viable players on the field this year compared to last year. So baby steps still. Well, hopefully, fingers crossed, because it feels like every November the Browns play like 2 or 3 like terrible win games.
Yes, Lake Erie has become quite angry these days.
Yeah, like even last year, because you try to look at Deshaun Watson and you say like, well, how much of a hall pass do we give him? I mean, it feels like he's already gotten a pretty large hall pass on life already. And he doesn't play the 11 weeks. How much does that like factor in? He comes back this season late. The offensive line is kind of rotating at that point. They played a game against the Saints, which was like miserable weather. They play a terrible win game against the Ravens. It's really hard to kind of figure out and say, like, do we just throw everything out that Deshaun Watson did last year and this offense did just because of the circumstances? You really kind of have to go back to Dante Culpepper to find a player that was as good as Deshaun Watson was and then just wasn't good anymore. And even Culpepper had the severe knee injury, was a little older than where Watson is now, and Randy Moss retired. But like, it'd be pretty unheard of for like Deshaun Watson to just be terrible at football again. Cause it just really, we don't have an evidence of like a lot of quarterbacks, like just that were as good as Deshaun Watson was the first 5 years of his career, just being miserable.
Yeah. I mean, he played at an MVP level the last time we saw him in 2020. He could have easily won the MVP in 2020. Sorry, Denny. And real quick, by the way, Rich, who almost never makes a mistake. I believe you meant Marquise Goodwin. You said they signed Marquise Brown.
Oh yeah, they probably wish they got Hollywood Brown.
They do.
And Hollywood probably wishes he was there instead of Arizona.
Sorry to fact check you, but
no, you're right. You got to bring it, man. Drop the hammer.
we had to hire more fact checkers for Rich's appearance here because he just tries to sneak in all these alternative facts. So.
It's been a ruse for over a decade, man. You guys don't even know. No, everyone's just too lazy to check.
Same, by the way. And so the weather thing. I know it sounds funny. I've said this on Twitter. I can't get past it. I can't get past the weather thing in Cleveland. I can't like go in on like all these pass catchers for the Browns when the it's apocalyptic weather in Cleveland from like October 15th. It's not even in December. It's like October 15th the rest of the year.
What is the deal? And by the way, I thought you were saying build a dome. That's why I was saying stop.
Oh, definitely build a dome, of course.
But I mean, I used to think Pittsburgh was the worst NFL weather. Cleveland, Rich is not exaggerating. There's been 2 or 3 games each of the past 2 years that are like mid-continent hurricanes. Like it's really bizarre. And like I was about to make a terrible joke. Which lake did the Edmund Fitzgerald wreck on? I don't think it was Lake Erie. But it's like they're trying to recreate the wreck of that's horrible. Move on.
So my question to Rich is: does the weather thing bother you at all? And as funny as that sounds, and does it make you? I don't know. Like for me, it makes me more in on Nick Chubb as a guy that just doesn't force feed in those situations. Am I overthinking the weather aspect to Cleveland?
Here's your boomer card, Denny.
Yeah. I mean, probably it's so hard in August and July when we're drafting to say like, all right, I'm not going to take a guy because on November 24th, like it's going to be windy. Like
it's really windy.
I mean, it's so hard to like factor that stuff in. I do think you can use like that stuff as like tiebreakers, like consciously, like when you're saying, well, this guy plays in a dome later on, you can look at some of the schedule stuff like that and factor that in. But like from a top down stance, I think it's hard to over impact like that stuff. And the Browns really only have 2 expensive players anyways. If you count Amari Cooper, it's really just Nick Chubb where he's at. And it's very interesting. I keep going back and forth on Nick Chubb. I started out really bullish. And then as I'm starting to do more work, like it's this, I just had an article come out last week that talked about like the top-down trends of the running back position and how the influx of like as quarterbacks are getting more athletic and they're just occupying a larger part of the run game and they're impacting the passing game, like running back usage is just the correlation is just it lines up so much this era of football of quarterbacks getting more athletic and running backs getting used less in terms of like share of league-wide carries, share of league-wide targets, share of usage near the end zone. And I mean, you look at Nick Chubb last year, and like I said, we can throw out, it was only 6-game sample under unique circumstances with Deshaun Watson and the offense. I mean, Nick Chubb only had 1 game higher than RB20 when Deshaun Watson played. Wow. Nick Chubb's also a player, when you look at his career and the archetype of player he is, he's a guy that like when he scores touchdowns, he's really good for fantasy. And when he doesn't score touchdowns, it's hard for him. He in his career in games with a touchdown, he's averaging 22.5 PPR points per game. In games without a touchdown for his career, 8.5 points per game. He has 38 career games without a touchdown. He's been a top 12 scorer in just 1 of those games, a top 24 scorer in just 10 of those games. Now you look at the Browns from a top down stance and you say, who's going to play third downs for them this year? Is it going to be a Jerome?
I was going to ask you, is he actually going to catch more passes? Like, get to the bottom of this.
Yeah, it's very hard because he's never been in the role. He ran 17 pass routes on third down last year. Didn't catch a single pass on third down. But who's going to play? Who are the Browns going to trust as like a pass protector, right? Is it going to be like
not Jared Ford, not Jared Ford,
right? And
maybe
it's hard to say that. So you figure even with Deshaun Watson, like it still sets up for Nick Chubb to like run the most pass routes of his career, maybe luck box into the most receptions of his career. He's not going to catch 50 passes, but if he could flirt with like 35 to 40, that's like a significant boon for his floor in those weeks where he doesn't score touchdowns. But it is interesting the dynamic of Deshaun Watson because if you look at Deshaun Watson, even if you don't buy a bounce back for Deshaun Watson, what he does structurally for the offense just opens up so much for a guy like Nick Chubb. I mean, you look at last year, he had 159 carries with 3 or more wide receivers on the field last year. The first 2 years he played with Kevin Stefanski, he had 146 total in those circumstances. And if you're going to give Nick Chubb the highest light box rate of his career, a guy that's already hyper efficient running against heavy boxes, that does give him kind of a tarmac to lead the league in rushing, right? It just, you need the touchdowns for a guy like Nick Chubb to compensate for the lack of overall receptions. But I mean, what Deshaun Watson does structurally for him just is going to give him the largest tarmac he's had in his career running the football.
I do want to say before anybody can take legal action against us that Nick Chubb is the best pure rusher in the game. I just want to put that.
I didn't want to
there.
say it. It's trademarked, I think.
Yeah,
Denny, he said 0% chance Nick Chubb was going to catch 50 passes. Would you say it's truly zero?
Well, I mean, that's a lot, 50.
27 last year. I think his career has 36.
Yeah, I mean, you'd sign up for 40. I'd sign up for 40.
You would sign up. What do we think the odds are at 40, Rich?
I mean, they're not, like I said, playing with the mobile quarterback definitely dings it. And even Deshaun Watson, he did throw the running backs a little bit. He was 21st among the 47 quarterbacks that threw 100 more passes last year and targeting running backs. There's like an opportunity for some checkdowns here. Granted, like I said, that was with the ghost of David Bell out there running wind sprints, where they might get a little more functionality out of some of the players running routes. But yeah, I would say maybe 10% chance. I still think you're looking for probably like 30 to 35 to kind of be like the hotbed of like, you'll be happy you get it.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds about right to me.
Real quick, Rich, on David Njoku. So Njoku had a career year last year, pretty much across the board. Not huge splits as far as I've seen between Brissett and Watson. He had a 20% target share with Watson under center for Cleveland last year. I would never say the sentence that tight end is deep this year. This is something I would not say, okay, under threat of death. But is Njoku a late round guy that you would target if you don't end up with one of the elites?
He's definitely in that mix, I think, of guys like when you hit that firewall past, probably Darren Waller, and you're looking for guys you can talk yourself into, have kind of the opportunity to be either maybe the second best target in their passing game, they're on the proper age spectrum, and they have athleticism. Like he does check off all of those boxes. Right. So I can't push back like when you get into that range. I'm usually waiting a little bit longer than him. He was my guy last year. I was drafting a ton of him last year when he was like tight end 20. Now he's like tight end 9. Like I'm just never excited about taking a tight end there when I miss out. Because usually anytime we fall in love with these guys, we get into where tight end is, and it's just like, yeah, none of those guys ended up being good. So I was better off just waiting. And that's kind of the philosophy I adopted.
Denny asked about Njoku. Amari Cooper averaged 72 yards per game with Jacoby Brissett last year, and that fell to 61 with Deshaun Watson. He's kind of trending towards a career year before Deshaun Watson took over. It seems strange that everyone was less productive with Deshaun Watson. Still think that's probably more like the rust is coming off for Deshaun Watson, but Amari Cooper career year, something that's in play for year 9 in the league? Or is this guy just hard cap? He's never getting 1,200 yards no matter what situation you put him in.
I think we kind of saw last year. I mean, there still was upside. I mean, even in that offense, he had career high 9 touchdowns. His yards per catch were the second highest of his career. So we know that this Kevin Stefanski's team can get guys open, right? With the structure of offense that they run. He's going to get Amari Cooper into space. You just worry a little bit maybe about like the target stuff. And listen, there are brilliant people in the world. None of them bought Twitter, but there are brilliant people in the world. And I don't think a damn one of them can explain to you like what's going on with this like home road Amari Cooper stuff. It's just one of the biggest anomalies of like Earth, and we just have to accept it exists. Like Ben Roethlisberger had like one of these like careers too, where like there's typically just a ton of noise and home road splits, but like it's just been consistent his whole career, no matter where he played, whether it's in Oakland or Dallas and now in Cleveland. Like you look even last year, he was 8th in receiving yardage in Cleveland. He was 8th in the league in receiving yardage at home. 9th in catches per game at home, and on the road 39th in catches, 21st in yards. Just followed him forever. I know Denny loves when I use the word cattywampus, but it is the most cattywampus receiver production we've ever seen. And so I just think that we're going to get the same kind of like production for him, where like you look at the end of the day and you're like, Amari Cooper had really solid fringe wide receiver 1 numbers, was more of like a volatile wide receiver 2 on your roster. That's just kind of who I think he is. He's like, it's the Maya Angelou thing. Like he's already told us who he was. Like, let's believe him.
Hey, that's a great Richism right there. I love that. And I will say that the home road splits for Amari Cooper is something I've always wanted to dismiss, and never really could, because they seem to stick around. They seem to like hold true year after year. I do think he's someone who is just kind of meh to me. It's just like his ADP is around a point where it's like he's probably not going to fall much below that. He's probably not going to, spike way above that. So I think you're fine taking him. I don't know. I actually don't know do you think Amari Cooper would fit better in like a heavy wide receiver? I'm sorry. Yeah. A heavy wide receiver build or like a heavy running back build as maybe, your wide receiver one.
I think he fits a lot of builds because of the arbitrage factor, right? Like, so there's like a clear firewall at wide receiver again. And you look at last year with the way structurally teams played defense, forcing offenses to condense. And we saw fewer 4 wide receiver sets than we have, in the NFL, that wide receiver ones have kind of separated themselves from the pack. So there's like a firewall, but I think that Amari Cooper from a fantasy stance isn't different than like a lot of guys that kind of go like significantly ahead of him. Like, is there like a real difference in fantasy between like Amari Cooper and a T Higgins, right. Potentially even a DK Metcalf? What about a Devontae Smith, right? He goes way after those guys. So I think he fits a lot of builds. He can be arbitrage on those guys. If you waited, what you're getting. So you're going to buy those 130 targets. You're going to have those spike weeks potential for him. So I think he just is like really fairly priced, fits a lot of builds. It just kind of exists out there in space.
I think Pat is back with us. Pat,
well, I'm back, but I don't know. Someone said I look like I'm in the 8-bit Matrix.
Yeah,
not looking too great.
Pixel Pat,
look very yellow. Hopefully, I sound okay.
You do sound okay. I hope you can hear us. Rich just mentioned T Higgins, so I thought it would be a good transition to get over to the Cincinnati Bengals and players we're drafting from that offense. I wanted to ask real quick, Rich, about T Higgins. I feel like part of his inflated ADP has to do with his contingency value if anything ever happens to Jamar Chase. And we saw this a little bit last year. I don't know. I forget how many games Chase missed, but Higgins was, a great fantasy asset during that stretch. And the numbers bear out that T Higgins is a fantasy wide receiver one, even a top end wide receiver one when Chase is out. So how much of that do you think is being incorporated into his ADP right now?
Yeah, a lot of it. I think that you see that group of guys, Jalen Waddle, T Higgins, Devontae Smith, more guys that like their overall production is kind of limited by the receiver they play with, but their contingency value is, if Tyreek Hill were to miss time, if AJ Brown was like, those guys go through the moon. And that always kind of plays into it. And plus, like I said, that firewall guys is earlier than ever. So you're kind of forced to stare down that tier of wide receivers, right?
Yeah.
And say like, am I going to take these guys or am I going to take a swing on Ramondre Stevenson, right? Like it's kind of where we are in drafts. Like you're starting to approach the dead zone of running backs. And so you just keep throwing wide receivers at the wall. So Higgins is one of those guys, like he's a very tough click for me where he goes because of just the way the wide receiver meta is being drafted, just the elevation, the player he is when Jamar Chase is playing. And that goes back 2 years, not just last year. And just the floor potentially has big spike week guy, contingency upside is definitely there. But like I said, like you can wait and get an Amari Cooper later. Like, what if you can get what about Christian Watson? Like after that, is there going to be like a huge difference in that? Like a Calvin Ridley, those guys, DK Metcalf, those guys all go after him. And I don't think that he belongs like outside of a tier with those guys.
The Bengals, they're like the least. We don't have any questions about the Bengals. That's the thing. It's like set and forget target tree. Even the backfield now is settled with Joe Mixon. Oh, Denny, you raised your finger.
Yeah, no, I have some numbers I'd like to share with the classroom, if we don't mind, for a second. So Irv Smith is another tight end sicko name that I'm somewhat interested in. Irv Smith had some decent outings before TJ Hawkinson arrived to Minnesota last year. The Bengals tight ends saw a 15% target share combined last season. Is there any path, do you think, to Irv Smith becoming an every week starter in 12-team leagues, or are we really just in like streaming territory, like pray for a touchdown territory with Irv?
Yeah, it's the same problem I think with Hayden Hurst, had last year. It's if you want to take a 25-year-old former second-round pick that's playing in an elite offense, there are worse swings to take at that point at the tight end position. No pushback at all. Your flavor of choice at tight end, especially one that comes in that kind of environment. But we know that targets are finite and targets are earned by your best players. And when you look at the Bengals from a top-down perspective, how do you get to Irv Smith having a weekly consistent high target share, right? He's just not as good as Jamar Chase. He's not as good as T. Higgins. He's not as good as Tyler Boyd. And with the way structurally teams defend the Bengals, where, they force teams, the Bengals are kind of forced to check down and throw things underneath, which is why Joe Mixon had like his career high in receiving last year. Like, where do you get to Irv Smith, right? Like, how does he earn targets over all those players? He needs some dominoes to fall and some things to open. Plus, they got Chuck Sizzle in the draft. I know Ray Summerlin, former NBC colleague of your guys, back in my heart. Would be dismissed if I didn't mention, Chuck Sizzle, Charlie Jones, maybe potentially get a chance to get some run this year if there's an injury.
I was really hoping you were going to clarify who Chuck Sizzle was.
Literally no idea who that is.
Like first of all, I know who Charlie Jones is because I had some great outings with him in college DFS last year. Okay, he was like my guy for a while before his price exploded. So I'm familiar, and I still had no clue what you're talking about. Chuck Sizzle. What is this?
Yeah, listen, Charlie Jones is going to dress every week this year because he's a great return man. So he's going to be the Bengals' primary return man. Whereas you think of like last year, if there's an injury to any of these, wide receivers, like they all missed time last year, and you're elevating a guy like Mike Thomas, right? It's just a vagabond. Now you're going to be elevating a guy that's going to be dressing that is kind of as elite college production. He could do a lot of things. So it's not just like inserting Mike Thomas. I think the Bengals, with the amount of injuries they had at wide receiver the past 2 years, and you look at their yards per play, when any one of the wide receivers has missed time the last 2 years, they drop almost like a full yard and a half yards per play. So they definitely have been cognizant of just getting more guys that can be viable wide receivers, because as good as you are in the NFL, injuries happen, and you need 4 or 5 wide receivers deep, man. It's a league of just needing wide receivers. Even the teams that have good wide receivers need more of them.
Forgive my increasing yellowness if you're watching this on video.
Like a Simpson character.
No, I do. I look like I'm like in The Martian right now, but I'm still here. You know who else is still here is Joe Mixon. We thought all offseason he was going to get cut, or at least have to take a pay cut. He did take a pay cut. The Bengals coaching staff was talking up Travion Williams all spring, even though he touched the ball like 5 times his entire rookie contract. We were talking up Chase Brown, even though he's like 24 years old and had 1 million college touches, Reeves. Do we think the Mixon role is just staying the same? And he's going to be an RB2, maybe a high-end RB2, catches a lot of passes, isn't terribly efficient on the ground. Basically, it's a situation normal for Joe Mixon after his contract restructure.
It's not dissimilar to what we talked about with Nick Chubb earlier, the situation in terms of depth and role, because Joe Mixon, although he's caught a lot more passes than Nick Chubb in his NFL career, he still does the same thing. He doesn't play third downs at all. He doesn't play in passing situations at all. He has not with this regime up until this point. Last year, 18 pass routes on third down for Joe Mixon. When you look at this depth chart, is it going to be Chris Evans, Travion Williams, Chase Brown? Historically, rookies do not get those down in distance. They're not trusted in passing situations. That's what's interesting about everyone trying to get really excited about Kendra Miller with a possible Alvin Kamara suspension. We'll see if he earns those snaps. But you look at those Bengals guys, like they don't have any touches. They don't have really any history of playing in pass protection. So does it elevate Mixon for a role he's never had, or does he just continued the drumbeat of coming off the field in those situations? Very kind of interesting kind of dichotomy to play out this season, because if he gets those snaps, it can turn a guy like Mixon, who set career high, he had 60 catches last year while running 18 pass routes on third down. If he plays on third down, like he could be a guy that catches 70 passes. Maybe he has 80 receptions with the way teams play the Bengals.
Yeah, I actually have a little stat here on that. Samaj Perine had a 9% target share last year. Mixon and Perine combined for a 21.5% target share, which, considering the pass heaviness of the Bengals offense, could be really good for Mixon's PPR value.
We'll be right back after this to close out the show talking the Pittsburgh Steelers. Juan Soto and the San Diego Padres are looking to climb back into the postseason race, and they will have a shot to inch closer on Sunday MLB leadoff in Detroit this weekend when they take on the Tigers. Stream the matchup live on July 23rd at 11:30 a.m. Eastern, exclusively on Peacock. And just a quick reminder, you can find all of your favorite NBC sports shows on Amazon Music. Just head to amazon.com/NBC Sports. Denny streaming any Detroit Tigers? They've got a lot of streaming options.
Well, what else? That's all I do is I stream Detroit Tigers games. It's a team that I love and that I have watched throughout my life, except for I've never seen a Tigers.
You didn't throw Michael Lorenzen against the A's last week, like I did.
No. The last Tigers player I saw was Cecil.
I was gonna say Cecil Fielder.
Yeah, Cecil Fielder. That's it.
Anyway.
Whitaker.
Yeah, Reeves could probably remember some guys from the Tigers as a
Alan Trammell.
AL Central fan. But again, we're not here to talk about baseball. We're here to talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers. We're here to be extremely yellow if you're watching on video, like I am still right now. Sorry, I'll stop talking about it. But Rich, is it already too late for Najee Harris, who his entire case was predicated on really not just being an every down player, but being an every snap player, at least the RB1 case, I should say. I think last year he opened the door to Jaylen Warren to take third down work, and Jaylen Warren came through that door and has maybe seized enough of the third down role, even if he's not the every down third down back, enough to fatally wound Najee Harris as an elite fantasy option and maybe keep him mired in this low end RB2ville. Or is that too pessimistic of a take? And is the fantasy community in general too pessimistic on Najee Harris? Because you ask any sharp or anyone who collects a check to write about fantasy football, oh yeah, Najee Harris, no way. I mean, including me, there's literally no way. You couldn't pay me to draft him. But are we missing something here?
There's a lot of people that are on the train that he could be this year's Josh Jacobs, although he's going to have an ADP 4 rounds difference where Josh Jacobs ended last year, with especially after the preseason. So I don't know how we got to that point. Maybe it's just July Hyper Bowl. We need something to talk about. I mean, Najee, man, he's the kind of running back for fantasy that's really weird because you're always going to hear that. He's probably going to consistently beat ADP and kind of not matter still. Every year you're gonna be oh man, Najee was the RB10, but it just highlights what the RB10 doesn't matter, right? If you just don't have the top 3 running backs, and that kind of parlays into what I talked about earlier about just the position dropping off. Joe Mixon was that guy last year, right? Joe Mixon was the RB10 and the RB6 in points per game, but nobody that owned Joe Mixon on their team would ever say yeah, that dude was definitely the 10th best running back last year. No. Yeah, and you look at Najee Harris, he had 300 touches, 313 touches, 1,200, yards, another 10 touchdowns. Good overall numbers, right? Looks strong, solid. But when you disperse those on a weekly basis, just nothing exciting. No spike weeks, no ceiling weeks. He does everything really well, nothing great. He's a workload guy. Really would have thrived in fantasy football, 15 years ago. In today's era, really tough for him to kind of have these spike weeks to combat these guys. He went from 84% of the snaps as a rookie down to 66%. He played 170 more snaps as a rookie than any other running back. He played 205 fewer snaps last year than as a rookie. He led the NFL to 129 pass routes on third down. It's kind of the theme of the show, third down pass routes for some reason. But then Jaylen Warren, 89 pass routes on third down last year to just 48 for Najee. He already took that role from him. And if he's just more efficient, Jaylen Warren continues to be as efficient as he was as a rookie. Eventually people are just we need to get him the football more. And that started to happen last year before Warren got hurt and had the concussion. We started to see Warren get more early down stuff, and then he got hurt and never got kind of back in that role to kind of close the season. But if we go through another course this season where Najee's just kind of an ham and egger, and this is a team starving for explosive plays, the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yes.
I wrote about this in the Sharp Football Preview. The Pittsburgh Steelers scored 2 touchdowns outside the red zone last season. It was the fewest amount of touchdowns scored for a team, over the past 30 years. They averaged 6.8 yards per offensive touchdown last year. No team over the past 30 years has averaged fewer yards per touchdown in a season than that. Now, that's just going to give them some blind regression to the mean that you bet on. And listen, Kenny Pickett's not going to have a 1.8% touchdown rate. Deontay Johnson's going to fall into the end zone this year.
I don't know.
But this is a team, when you look at the Pittsburgh Steelers structurally, where are the explosive players? You got George Pickens, and then it's Jaylen Warren. Allen Robinson, that Allen Robinson hasn't existed for 3 years, right? That's who they added. Deontay Johnson, as great as a separator is on this shallow and intermediate levels, we have a large body of work that he's not creating explosive plays in the pass game. I love Pat Freiermuth. But like, where are the explosive plays coming from? They're not coming from Najee Harris.
Right.
I mean, you look at the past 2 years, there have been 74 running backs with 100 or more carries. He has a run of 10 or more yards on 8.1% of his carries. That's 60th out of those 74. And no running back with as many carries as him has a lower rate of explosive runs. So like, Warren is that dude. He's got the juice. Like, this is an offense that needs to generate bigger plays, and they have a very limited supply of players that can create big plays. And Jalen Warren happens to be one of them. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's going the way it did the first 8 to 10 weeks of last year, if they just say we have to give him more touches.
So two things on Najee. Okay. Yes, he's boring. He's boring as hell, man. I mean, you call it a ham and egger. That's an insult to ham and eggs everywhere. Okay. And I'm personally offended as well. But I want some boring running backs on my teams, my zero RB teams, some guys who are just locked in for volume. If Najee Harris falls ADP wise, right now he's going as like RB 12 or 13, depending on the format. If he falls into like the RB 18 to 20 area because of a bad preseason or because of lots of training camp talk about backfield alternatives, including Warren, then I may be more inclined to go with Najee. And I will say, you talk about they have to have more explosive plays. I guess my counter to that, Rich, is that philosophically the Steelers don't want explosive plays. They want to win 13-10, and Mike Tomlin doesn't care about your analytics, and he doesn't care about throwing it downfield. Yes, they're going to accidentally score more touchdowns this year because they literally can't score fewer than they did last year, especially through the first, 12, 13 weeks of the season. But I think that this team is just committed, just stone committed to just not scoring points.
It's interesting you look at Najee because he's actually done nothing but kind of climb the last month in ADP. And like, I don't see how the guy we just talked about, Joe Mixon, how you could take Najee Harris over Joe Mixon. I don't really see how you could.
I could before when there was genuine.
I guess before you just the uncertainty of.
There was genuine uncertainty with Joe Mixon's roster spot. I'll say.
We'll see if that ends up flipping, over the course of the remainder of the summer. But Najee's interesting. It's interesting because he's climbed this summer.
Because he probably just on touches alone had maybe gotten a little too low. But like you said, there's further room to fall is the scary part with Najee Harris, is that there's a chance he's not at the bottom yet. And I guess the rebuttal that people could have is that he was playing through a Lisfranc injury for almost all of last year. He was a little better at the end of the year. But Najee is, I think, very justifiably one of like the industry-wide like cold water players this summer. You mentioned George Pickens, someone we were so excited for as a rookie. He's been another cold water player. A lot of people saying it's a really bad sign as a rookie. He did not command more targets. He still did make a fair number of big plays. I mean, are we expecting a step forward for George Pickens? Or is he going to be one of these downfield guys where there's just always a DB glued to him and Kenny Pickett just like doesn't have the arm to consistently make those kind of throws? What are we thinking with George Pickens heading into year 2, Rich?
And when I look at the Steelers, I still find myself kind of gravitating towards like Pickens and Freiermuth being the two guys at ADP that make the most sense. We just talked about Najee. I just don't think he has the requisite upside. Like, he's gonna be one of those guys, like I said, he's gonna go RB 12 to 15, finishes RB 9. People are like, look, I beat ADP. Like, cool, congrats. But when you look at like guys that can absolutely like kind of like be tilting where they go in ADP, and tilting is like win games in your favor, I think you have to look at like Pickens and the archetype of wide receiver he is. And it could be damaging. Maybe he is just Mike Williams, right? Like maybe he's just Pittsburgh Mike Williams, like as we get there. But like as a guy going right around like wide receiver, like 36, wide receiver 40, like that's kind of an archetype I'll bet on at that point, right? Instead of taking Deontay Johnson around like wide receiver 24, right? Because like when you look at Deontay Johnson, like you got that like that Russian nesting doll. What are they called? Babushkas of guys. You got like Chris Godwin. You've got Deontay Johnson. Maybe DeAndre Hopkins with the Titans fits in that bowl too, of like guys that don't generate a lot of huge plays in the passing game. They're predicated on targets, but they play in like quarterback and offensive situations that aren't that great. What's the ceiling for those types of guys? Guys that probably beat ADP, but is it really winning you of a lot of things? Like Pickens at least has that archetype that where you're like, it's okay to miss at a guy in the wide receiver 3 flex range that has that range, right? Like that's I still want to bet on that archetype and see where it lands, because if the Steelers are going to generate any big passing plays, it's going to be from a guy that averaged 15 air yards per target. 32% of his targets were deep targets last year, 20 yards or further. That was 6th in the league as position. He ran 221 go routes last year. It was the most of all NFL wide receivers. The next closest rookie was Garrett Wilson at 135. Granted, you can't make the whole airplane out of go routes. We're going to need some more, get more bunnies, but I think the price is fair for him. I came in expecting to be down on George Pickens because, like, you know, to get the Gabe Davis, like,
he's not a target commander. Right? He's not a target commander.
We saw Gabe Davis, right, do this last year where he just did nothing but perpetually climb, and then you get your brains beaten at the end of the year. But like Pickens is still going as a wide receiver 3 flex. Like, it's hard to really push back on like where he goes, right? Like, it really
I don't know, man. I don't know. I have no interest in Pickens at ADP. I feel like you're going to get like some weeks where, you get like 18 points out of him because he hit on a big one because he has that dog in him. But then there'd be so many weeks where you're just like, blood coming from your eyes looking at George Pickens, one catch for 8 yards or something. I don't know.
I just think if we look at the Steelers from a top-down stance, you say like they just by proxy have to run into more big plays. Like, I don't
know. I guess they are due. That's still a thing, right?
Yeah. That's analytics, folks. That's analytics.
Rich, by the way, you mentioned like the guys who overperform their ADP, but by like 1 or 2 slots. We call that the Brandon Cooks. Or I've been ranting about this all offseason, like Brandon Cooks just being drafted too low yet again. And his ADP is wide receiver 29, and then he finishes as wide receiver 28. Man, that's the kind of player you just described.
And not every guy has to be like a home run, right, in your draft. Like, you're only going to get so many wide receiver ones in a year, especially the further you move down in the draft. But I'm just saying, like, when you look at guys, like we always do this every offseason, and I've been railing about it since the days I worked at NBC. Everyone looks backward and forward at these seasons in like as a holistic approach, right? But fantasy football, always a weekly game. It's all about running into the right pockets of production for players, because the amount of players that are really elite on a weekly basis at a per position level are literally, you can count on one hand at every position. And it's just all about running into the right pockets of production. So like when we say like a guy was the wide receiver 20, what the hell are we even saying anyways? Like, what does that mean when you tell me the guy was the wide receiver 20?
What are we saying with that? I don't know.
Rich is dangerously close to saying there's no difference between good and bad things.
But I'm just saying, like, what are we? There's a lot of ways. There's a lot of ways to be the wide receiver 20, right? You could just be survivorship, where you're just like a baseline wide receiver 3 every week. You don't get hurt. But you never have any weeks that matter. You just didn't get hurt. You survived, right? Or you could be a guy that did get hurt. But you were like good for like a 4 or 5 week stretch, right? Like Christian Watson, right? Like Christian Watson absolutely impacted the fantasy season last year for that stretch of the season. It doesn't matter the first 10 weeks. He's an absolute zero. Probably did it for a team that didn't draft him, but he absolutely impacted every league that he was in. There's just a lot of avenues to get there. So like when you say like a guy is going wide receiver 36 and he can end up being the wide receiver 20, like why? Well, like how can that be the foundation of your argument? And when you look at projections going forward and you say like, yeah, listen, I've got Chris Godwin. He's projected to be my wide receiver 17. He goes wide receiver 25. That shows me a good influx value. Does it?
Are you sure about that?
I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying, like, using these overall finishes and overall stats and stuff, like, it matters for like literally like 1 to 4 players at each position per season.
That's a very depressing way to end the show. Wow.
Hey, Rich is real. He is a real guy who has real things to say, and all of that was real. And now I am having an existential crisis.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of feeling existential too. Thanks, Rich.
Yes, and we all will just go eat the meat mountain or whatever.
Yeah, right? Time to order up a couple mountains. Cry in our Toyota Camrys and find the one part of the Arby's parking lot where like the workers aren't parked, so like no one can see you like on their smoke break as you eat the meat mountain. Does that sound right, Denny?
That sounds like a Tuesday afternoon to me.
Yeah,
folks.
that does sound like a Tuesday afternoon to you. It's Monday afternoon. Thank you so much to BaltimoreRavens.com's Clifton Brown for joining us and previewing the Ravens. Thank you to at Sharp Football Analysis, Rich Hribar, at Lord Reeves on the Twitter machine. our old friend, one of the very best in the business, one of our old coworkers, Cleveland Guardians fan. Reeves, thank you so much for joining us.
And anytime, guys. Hopefully we get a chance to do it again this year.
We will, and I apologize if you're watching on YouTube for the Canadian wildfire smoke in my office, making me so yellow. So yellow, just hopelessly yellow. So for Denny Carter, for Rich Hribar, I'm Patrick Daugherty. Thank you so much for listening. We will be back on Thursday to preview the NFC North.